I still remember the day I got the call from Alex, my old friend from school. We hadn't spoken in years, and out of nowhere, he invited me to this grand party at his mansion. Alex had always been the wealthy one, even back when we were younger. He came from a family that had more than enough, while I came from a much simpler background. Over the years, our paths drifted apart, and I wasn't sure what had changed to make him reach out now. When he invited me, I was surprised, to say the least. Why me? We hadn't kept in touch, and I couldn't help but wonder if there was more to it. Was he genuinely trying to reconnect, or was there something else? Curiosity gnawed at me, but I tried to stay positive. After all, we had shared good times once upon a time. I'll be honest, though. I felt nervous. This wasn't just a casual get-together, it was a party at a mansion. I started thinking about what I'd wear, knowing I didn't have anything fancy enough to fit in with the high-class crowd I was sure would be there. I didn't exactly move in those circles, and it made me feel a bit out of place even before the night had begun. But deep down I wanted to go. A part of me thought, maybe Alex wanted to rekindle our friendship, so I decided to push my doubts aside and attend. I told myself it was just one evening, and if I felt uncomfortable, I could always leave early. As I prepared that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. But I ignored it, thinking, what could possibly go wrong? When I finally pulled up to Alex's mansion, the first thing that hit me was how enormous it was. I'd heard people say he was doing well for himself, but this place was on another level. It wasn't just a big house, it looked like something out of a movie. The driveway alone seemed endless, and there were expensive cars parked all around, the kind I'd only seen in magazines. The building itself was breathtaking, with towering windows and perfectly manicured gardens lining the entrance. As I stepped out of my car, I suddenly felt small. I couldn't help but take a deep breath, feeling a wave of nerves. Here I was, just me, standing in front of this grand estate, wondering what I'd gotten myself into. The sound of laughter and chatter drifted from inside, and I could already tell I was about to walk into a room full of people who lived a very different life than I did. When I entered the mansion, the inside was just as grand as the outside. Everything gleamed from the marble floors to the massive chandelier that hung overhead. The place was filled with people, all dressed in expensive clothes, looking like they had just stepped off the pages of a fashion magazine. Women in sleek designer dresses, men in tailored suits. It was clear they were used to this kind of luxury. I glanced down at my outfit, feeling a little self-conscious. I had picked the nicest dress I owned, but compared to everyone else, it felt simple, maybe even out of place. I did my best to push those thoughts away. After all, I was here now, and I didn't want to spend the whole night worrying about appearances. As I walked further in, I could hear bits of conversation around me. People were talking about their latest vacations, their businesses, the investments they had made. It was all so foreign to me. I couldn't relate to any of it, and with each passing moment, I felt more like an outsider. I was polite, smiling at those who greeted me, but inside I was struggling to stay calm. I tried to remind myself that I was here to see Alex, that this was just one night. But standing there, surrounded by wealth and luxury I couldn't even dream of, I couldn't help but feel like I didn't belong. Everyone else seemed so comfortable in this world, while I was silently counting down the minutes until I could slip away without causing a scene. Still, I stayed. Part of me was determined to see how the night would unfold, no matter how uncomfortable I felt. At first, things seemed fine. I found a quiet corner, trying to blend in as best I could. Alex came over to greet me with that same wide smile I remembered from school, and for a moment I relaxed. It was nice to see a familiar face in a sea of strangers. He introduced me to a few of his friends, who all looked effortlessly elegant and well off. I felt out of place, but I reminded myself to just smile and go along with it. As the night went on, though, Alex's tone started to shift. It began with small comments, things that felt like jokes but left me feeling uneasy. He'd say something like, "Remember when we used to hang out at that little pizza place? It was all you could afford back then, right, Lisa?" He'd laugh, and the others would chuckle along with him. I tried to laugh too, but inside something didn't feel right. It didn't stop there. As more people joined the conversation, Alex would bring up more of my past, always highlighting the fact that I hadn't come from the same privileged background as everyone else. He'd make comments about the jobs I had worked after school or the car I used to drive. "Oh, Lisa, remember that old beat-up car you had? What was it? A Honda, right? Surprised it didn't fall apart on you." Everyone laughed again, and I felt my face flush. I wanted to believe he was just teasing, but the more he went on, the clearer it became. This wasn't just harmless joking. It felt like he was trying to embarrass me in front of his rich friends. Each time he said something, the group would laugh, and I could feel all eyes on me, waiting for my reaction. I could feel myself shrinking inside, wondering why he was doing this. It hit me then. Alex hadn't invited me to catch up or reconnect as friends. He'd invited me to make me the punchline of his jokes, to show off how much more successful he was now. I looked around the room at the wealth and luxury surrounding me, and suddenly I felt completely out of place. It was like I was there just to remind everyone how much better off they were. I smiled through it, trying to brush it off, but inside I felt hurt and humiliated. It was becoming harder to stay calm, but I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing how much his words affected me. I realized then that this wasn't the friend I remembered. This was someone who had changed, and not in a good way. As we sat down for dinner, I was already feeling out of place, but I told myself to just get through the night. The dining room was grand, with a massive table that looked like it belonged in a palace. Everything was so extravagant. The silverware, the crystal glasses, the fine china. I couldn't help but feel out of my element, but I tried my best to stay calm and polite. I kept thinking, just make it through dinner, and then you can leave quietly. As the meal started, Alex began chatting with the other guests, and I felt like I could relax for a moment. But soon enough, he turned his attention back to me. "Lisa," he said with a grin, loud enough for everyone at the table to hear, "I have to say, you've always been so practical." I glanced up, confused, not sure where he was going with this. "I mean, look at you. You're not into all this flashy stuff like the rest of us," he continued, waving his hand at the room. "You've kept it simple, right? That's what makes you, well, you." I forced a smile, trying to play along, but I could feel the tension in the air. Then he took it further. "I mean, it's refreshing, isn't it?" he said, turning to the others. "Not everyone can pull off an outfit like that. It's simple, modest. Some people need the designer labels, but Lisa's always been down to earth." The way he said it, though, wasn't kind. It was clear he was mocking me, making fun of the fact that I wasn't dressed like everyone else. I could feel my face getting hot as the others at the table chuckled. They weren't cruel, but they were laughing all the same. It felt like they were all in on the joke, and I was the punchline. I looked down at my outfit, something I had carefully picked out, something I thought was nice, and suddenly I felt embarrassed. Compared to everyone else in their designer clothes, I felt like I didn't belong there at all. The worst part was how Alex kept going. He didn't stop at my outfit. He started making comments about how I'd always been more low-key than the rest of them, how I wasn't into the fancy lifestyle. "It's great, really," he said. "Lisa's just not into success the way we are." The table erupted in laughter, and I felt like I was shrinking into my seat. I wanted to disappear. The laughter, the stares, it all made me feel so small, so out of place. I realized then that this wasn't just a bad joke or a misunderstanding. Alex had invited me here to make me feel like I didn't belong, to humiliate me in front of his friends. It hurt more than I could put into words, but I kept a brave face, refusing to let them see how much it was affecting me. Still, I felt crushed. As I sat there trying to swallow my embarrassment, I was ready to leave. I couldn't take any more of Alex's condescending comments or the fake laughter from the guests. I had come here to reconnect, but instead I was humiliated. I reached for my napkin, thinking of an excuse to leave early, when something unexpected happened. One of the guests, an older gentleman who had been quietly watching the conversation unfold, suddenly stood up. His name was Mr. Donovan, and from the few things I had overheard earlier in the night, I knew he was someone important, wealthy, successful, the kind of person who seemed to fit right in with Alex and his circle. But the way he looked at Alex now wasn't friendly or amused. It was serious. "Enough," he said, his voice firm but calm. The laughter around the table died down, and everyone turned to look at him, including Alex, who seemed confused. "You think this is funny, Alex?" Mr. Donovan asked, his eyes narrowing. "You think it's funny to mock someone for their financial situation? Do you really believe you're better than Lisa because you're sitting in this fancy house surrounded by these people?" The room went completely silent. I froze in my seat, unsure of what was happening, but something in Mr. Donovan's tone told me that this was about to take a turn. "You weren't always rich," he continued, his voice steady. "In fact, there was a time when you were in the exact same situation as Lisa. Do you remember that?" Alex shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing around as if hoping the conversation would end. But Mr. Donovan wasn't finished. "Let me remind you," he said, looking directly at Alex. "When you first started out, you had nothing. No money, no connections. You were struggling just like Lisa is now. And who was it that helped you? Who gave you a chance when no one else would?" There was a pause, and for a moment it felt like the whole room was holding its breath. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Alex had always acted like he was born into wealth, like he had never struggled a day in his life. But now the truth was coming out. "It was me," Mr. Donovan said, breaking the silence. "I was the one who helped you when you had nothing. I believed in you when no one else did. And this is how you repay me? By mocking someone who's in the same position you once were?" I looked at Alex, and for the first time all night, he seemed shaken. His confident, smug expression was gone, replaced by one of embarrassment. The guests around the table shifted uncomfortably, realizing that this was no longer a light-hearted dinner. Mr. Donovan's words hung in the air, and I felt a mix of emotions: shock, anger, but also a strange sense of relief. I wasn't the only one who had struggled, and Alex's wealth wasn't as effortless as he had made it seem. He had been where I was, and yet here he was, pretending like he was above it all. In that moment, I realized something important. The wealth, the success, it didn't define who I was, and it certainly didn't make Alex better than me. Mr. Donovan had exposed the truth, and for the first time that night, I didn't feel small. I felt empowered. The moment Mr. Donovan finished speaking, the energy in the room shifted. The guests, who had been laughing and enjoying Alex's jabs at my expense just minutes earlier, were now sitting in awkward silence. No one dared to look at Alex, and the laughter that had filled the room was gone. It was like everyone suddenly realized how wrong the whole situation had been. I looked around the table, watching as the guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. Some of them looked embarrassed, others ashamed, but all of them were clearly rethinking how they had acted. I could see it in their eyes. They were no longer impressed by Alex's wealth or his fancy house. In fact, they seemed to be questioning everything he had said and done that night. Alex, who had been so confident before, now looked completely deflated. His smug grin had disappeared, and he was avoiding eye contact with everyone, especially me. It was like the entire room had turned on him in an instant. And for the first time that night, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel out of place. I felt strong, like I had a voice that deserved to be heard. So I took a deep breath and decided to speak up. "You know," I said, my voice steady but calm, "I don't think being rich or living in a big house makes anyone better than someone else." All eyes turned to me, and I could feel the weight of the moment. "What really matters," I continued, "is how we treat people, our kindness, our humility, our ability to lift others up instead of tearing them down." I looked around the table, making sure to make eye contact with each guest. Wealth doesn't define who we are. It doesn't make us better or more important. What defines us is our character, the way we treat people, especially those who may not have as much as we do. I paused for a moment, letting my words sink in. Alex invited me here tonight, and at first, I thought it was because we were still friends. But I realize now that he wanted to show off, to make me feel small. But the truth is, I'm not embarrassed about where I come from. I'm proud of who I am, and I don't need to have money to feel important. The guests were silent, but I could see the looks on their faces. They understood what I was saying, and they knew I was right. Alex shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly realizing that the tables had turned. The power he had held over me over the room was gone. At the end of the day, I said, finishing my thoughts, it's not about how much money we have or what kind of clothes we wear. It's about being good people, kind, humble, and respectful. That's what really matters. With those final words, I felt a sense of relief. I had spoken my truth, and in that moment, I no longer cared about Alex's wealth or what the other guests thought of me. I had stood up for myself, and that was all that mattered. After I finished speaking, the room was quiet. Not the awkward, tense silence that had filled the air earlier, but a different kind of quiet, a thoughtful one. I could see the wheels turning in the minds of the guests. They were beginning to understand something that Alex hadn't counted on. I wasn't weak, and I wasn't ashamed of who I was. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment, and decided to share more of my story. You see, I began, my voice steady, I didn't grow up with much. My family struggled, and I've faced a lot of challenges in my life. There were times when I didn't know how I was going to make it through, when it felt like everything was working against me. I paused for a moment, glancing around the table. The guests were listening intently now, their expressions no longer amused but curious. But through all of that, I continued, I learned something valuable. I learned that strength isn't measured by the money you have or the size of your house. It's measured by how you handle the struggles that life throws at you. It's about how you treat people, especially when you have the opportunity to be kind or to hurt someone. As I spoke, I could feel the guests' perception of me shifting. They had come into this dinner seeing me as someone who didn't belong, someone who was beneath them. But now they were starting to see the truth. Life hasn't always been easy for me, I admitted, but it's made me stronger and it's made me more compassionate. I know what it's like to struggle, and that's why I try to treat everyone with kindness, because I've been there. I looked at Alex, who was still sitting silently. The smug, confident expression he had worn all night was gone. He didn't know what to say. His plan to embarrass me had completely backfired. Instead of making me look small, he had exposed his own insecurities. Alex, I said softly, I don't hold anything against you. But I hope tonight has shown you that real wealth doesn't come from money. It comes from how you treat others. The other guests were nodding now, some even looking down at their plates as if they were reflecting on their own lives. I could see the realization dawning on them that kindness, compassion, and empathy are far more valuable than any material wealth. As the evening came to a close, I felt a deep sense of peace. I hadn't come to this dinner to prove anything, but in the end, I had shown them all the truth. Strength comes from within, from the challenges we overcome and the way we treat others, not from the money we have. And in that moment, I knew that I was richer than any of them could ever imagine. As the night was winding down, something unexpected happened. People began to see me differently, not as someone who didn't belong, but as someone who held her own despite everything. And then, in that quiet moment, I decided to reveal something I had kept to myself all night. Before I go, I said, standing up from my seat, there's something I want you all to know. The room fell silent and I could feel the attention shift back to me. Even Alex looked curious, unsure of what I was about to say. "I knew," I began, my voice calm but steady. "I knew what this dinner was really about. I knew why Alex invited me here tonight." A few guests exchanged surprised glances, and I saw Alex's face pale slightly. I knew from the moment he called that this wasn't just a friendly invitation. I knew he planned to embarrass me, to make me feel small in front of all of you. There was a murmur in the room, and Alex shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly not expecting this. "But here's the thing," I continued. "I didn't come here tonight to get angry or to prove anything to anyone. I came because I wanted to forgive him." The room went dead silent. I could see the shock on everyone's faces, including Alex's. No one had expected this. "You see," I explained, "holding on to anger or resentment only hurts you. It doesn't change the past, and it doesn't make you stronger. What makes you strong is being able to forgive, even when someone tries to hurt you." I looked directly at Alex, who now seemed completely lost for words. "I came tonight with the intention to forgive you, Alex, because I know that your actions don't define you. We all make mistakes, and we all have moments of weakness. But what matters is how we choose to move forward." The guests were visibly moved by my words. I could see a few nodding in agreement, others looking thoughtful. And Alex? He looked more vulnerable than I'd ever seen him. The arrogance and smugness he'd displayed all night were gone, replaced by something softer, maybe even regret.